is a truly wonderful thing. So first of all, Happy New Year to everyone. May 2021 bring us all health, first of all, and joy. And let's approach this new year with hope in our hearts. If nothing else, good books await us all. Can you see my shirt? You can't see my shirt. Let me stand up. There we go. It's my shirt for good books. Whoops. There we go, back again, rolling chair here. Okay, so I know we have some new people joining us today. Welcome everyone if you're new. Everybody will be on mute until the end, and then you can add in some of the books. Naomi, if you can put everybody and to all of you regulars, as you came in, it was just so beautiful to see all of your faces. It is a great honor to me to have you all join me, just so that I can share my pleasure in reading books. And I read 7 novels since the last time we were together, and you are going to hear about every one of them, because I like them all in different degrees. So first of all, I started with a bit of a desire towards escapism. So the first book that I read on Libby, that is borrowing an ebook from the library, was Winter in Paradise by Ellen Hilderbrand. And this was the first time that I read Hildebrand, and I'm sure some of you have read her before. And it was fun. It's a terrific beach read, or maybe I should say pandemic read, because it really gets you away. It's one of those books where if you accept the setup, off you go. So the setup is the following. A happily married woman in Iowa is told that her husband has died in a plane crash while he was doing business in the Caribbean. She goes out there, of course, but finds something very shocking. She discovers that her husband has a completely separate, full second life in the tropical paradise, owning an enormous villa and seriously involved with a long-term island lover. And there are many mysteries attached to that she has to solve, and this is only the first in a 3-part trilogy. It's set in the lush beauty of the tropics, and it's filled with drama, romance, and intrigue. So as I said, it's a lot of fun. The next is to introduce some of you to a mystery writer you might know, and that mystery writer is Andrea Camilleri, Sicilian writer, very well translated from the Italian. And I'm just thrilled to talk to you about this crime writer and his extremely popular series, 26 books featuring the entirely irresistible Inspector Salvo Montalbano. Just even love saying the name when I say it correctly.
Yeah. Hi.
The Guardian said about him, Montalbano's colleagues, chance encounters, Sicilian mores, even the contents of his fridge are described with the wit and gusto that make this narrator the best company in crime fiction today. So in this particular book, Montalbano solves 2 unrelated mysteries. One about a wall and brothers, and the other about the threatening of a middle school by a group of armed men. So I highly recommend Camilleri. You can start anywhere in this series, although like any ensemble piece, the more familiar you are with Montalbano and his colleagues and their quirks, the more enjoyable they are. One great feature is how lovingly every single meal this man eats is described in detail. And the meals are Sicilian, of course, and they're mouth-watering, and you can picture it all, whether he's eating at home, overlooking the water, or whether he's in his favorite restaurants, which you look at quickly. The author, who is quite a character himself, died in July 2019 at the age of 93, and he was still writing his final book. And I understand there's a hugely successful Italian TV series with just a new season that came on in 2020, but I have been unable to find it accessible here in Canada. So Myra asks if there's any recipes. There are no recipes listed in the book, but like, you know, the Donna Leone series, people started writing books around Donna Leone's Venice, and I think that might have included some of the food there as well. And I can imagine someone doing that afterwards. I will be sending to, oh, you can get the Maltabanis on DVD at the library. What a great idea. Thank you. Thank you. I will send out, as always, for those of you who are new, sometimes right after, sometimes the next day, I send out my book list that includes all the titles and authors that I've talked about, as well as a link to the recording. So if you miss a session, you'll get to watch the recording. So I'll send that out probably tomorrow morning to all of you. Okay, then the next mystery I read was called Killing Cassidy. You may remember way back at the beginning of the Zoomcast, I talked about Joffe Books, a mystery publisher, where you can buy ebooks at like $4.99. And so I read Killing Cassidy by Jean Dan.
About this early going phase at the university was
I wonder if David Hunt could mute.
Yeah, Cynthia, we didn't hear what you said.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll do it again. If everyone can make sure they're on mute, maybe Naomi can make sure that everyone is muted. So I mentioned Killing Cassidy by Jean Dams, which is one in those Joffe Publishers books. I mentioned Joffe Publishers early in our Zooms because for those of you who love mysteries, these are ebooks that are about $3.99. Now, they vary in quality, but you can always find some terrific books in there. And Killing Cassidy was just extremely entertaining. Okay, so now on to other books, and I do have covers to show you. And I chose the next one because I thought it would just be fun, but there was a lot more going on than that. And here it is, The Hotel Never Sink by Adam O'Fallon Price. And it was one of you who suggested,
okay.
I think Maxanne, but I'm not positive who it was, and I don't know that I saw Maxanne today. So, but someone suggested it to me, and thank you very, very much.
It was Mimi Hollenberg.
Mimi, thank you. Wow, I love this book. Thank you, Mimi, so much. Because this was a great read, and I'm going to talk to you quite a bit about it because I enjoyed it so much, and there are interesting kind of offshoots to it. And it was nominated for an Edgar Award for mysteries, but this is a novel that is just not easily categorized. So it's the story of the Never Sink Resort in the Catskills and the immigrant Jewish family that founded it. We see the generations of Sikorskys who run the hotel. It's a hotel of unparalleled luxury. But through those generations, a terrible mystery endures. Children have disappeared on or near the hotel's grounds, and the cases have never been solved. I consider this book part of a great tradition of hotel novels, not the least of which being Stephen King's The Shining. This is not a horror novel, though there is a terrible story to be unraveled. It is, though, sometimes pretty spooky, and the scenes of the long, empty halls have the resonance of The Shining's atmosphere. But it's also sometimes very funny and always highly entertaining, with a truly memorable cast of characters and an unforgettable setting. The author, Adam O'Fallon Price, is widely published in places like Granta, the Paris Review, and Harper's. This is his second novel. The first was The Grand Tour. So reading about Price, I realized that he wasn't Jewish. And I wondered why he would choose to write this book about a Jewish family in what is a Jewish setting in the Catskills. So seeing an email address on his website, I decided to write to him and received almost immediately this very generous reply. I'll read it to you. Hi, Cynthia. First, thank you for the kind words about my novel and for speaking about it with your book group. That's all of you. As you say, I'm not Jewish, and my connections with the area are tenuous. I'm originally from all over, largely North Carolina, but I pursued an MFA in fiction writing at Cornell and taught there from 2011 to 2015. During that time, my wife and I visited the Catskills quite a bit, and I simultaneously became friendly with a man who had grown up in Brooklyn and spent 4 decades going to Catskills hotels, mostly Grossinger's and the Concord. He was a great repository of stories, several of which appear in the novel. And in this way, I became fascinated by the place and decided I wanted to set a novel there. In terms of historical facts, the novel is mostly based on the Grossinger Hotel and family, about which there are several good books, including an autobiography by the matriarch, Jenny Grossinger. I should note that they seem like a delightful family and an American immigrant success story, and the dark aspects of the novel are completely my own invention. Thank you again. Happy New Year, Adam. So what a lovely email to receive. So I don't know if any of you ever went to the Catskills or specifically to Grossinger's. Yes, I see hands and nods, and I thought that would be the case. So this novel will definitely have resonance for you. Many of you might also know that Grossinger's was the Catskill resort that inspired Kellerman's Mountain Resort in the 1987 film Dirty Dancing. So I'm going to give you a bit of an update on the property, and some of this is very familiar from the novel. In 1986, the Grossinger's descendants sold the property. The main hotel and main resort areas closed in '86, but the golf course stayed open until really quite recently, 2017. Demolition of the remaining buildings on the resort started in the summer of 2018, and the last building was demolished on October 19th, 2018. You can go to the author's website where he has taken some really slightly spooky, but also wonderful photos of Grossinger's Catskills Resort. So I recommend that to you. Next, something completely different. This is Evening by the Toronto writer Nessa Rappaport. And in this novel, she uses the very tight structure of a Shiva, the 7 days of mourning in the Jewish tradition. It's a novel of 2 very different sisters. One highly accomplished, the other struggling to find herself. Tam remained in Toronto to become a famous news anchor, and the other sister, Eve, fled the family to live in New York, and there she struggles with writing a thesis on an obscure topic. One of the sisters is married and settled with children, and the other refuses to commit to her relationship. But the sisters have always been very close and shared so much. But a vehement argument happens right before Tam's death, and this weighs very heavily on Eve. Said Rappaport in a Globe interview, "What I've learned is that a relationship continues and grows after someone has left the world, even if there was a raw edge to the loss of what was unresolved or could not be." It is, of course, a book about mourning, and one definitely gets the feeling there's something very personal about this. Here's what the author said to the Globe interviewer about mourning. The books I read one morning were too sugary, except for C.S. Lewis's A Grief Observed, whose opening line is, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear." I wanted to write a book whose premise was, no one ever told me that grief felt so much like rage. I am not at all, she says, of the silver lining school of suffering. But loss is our lot. I hoped to alchemize my grief into something useful, and I keep returning to it because it keeps returning to me as it does to all mortals. I learned a lot about the author from a long article about her in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz, published in September, just after the publication of the novel. So Rappaport was originally a Torontonian, and in the late 1970s, she lived in Israel for several years, during which she worked as an English language editor. When she returned to North America, she had a career as an editor at Bantam Books in New York, working closely with such authors as former President Jimmy Carter and the Chrysler CEO Lee Iacocca on their memoirs, and these were both very famous books at the time. Now 67 years old, Nessa published Preparing for Sabbath when she was just 28 in 1981, and says now that that book came out of her pretty quickly. Her debut novel was a densely poetic story about the coming of age of a passionate and intensely spiritual Jewish woman. It took her 26 years to write this, her second novel, although she started it shortly after the first. In the intervening years, she published two other books, a short volume of poetry called A Woman's Book of Grieving in 1994, and a memoir called House on the River, A Summer Journey in 2004, about the time she organized a trip on a houseboat on an Ontario waterway for several generations of her extended family. In the Globe interview, she talks about what is home for her. She says, "And the city, New York, has kept its promise to me. From the start, it made possible a unique anonymity alongside the capacity to have hyphenated identities that are not pitted against one another. Writer, working woman, wife, mother, feminist, Jew. New York has accommodated all of them. There are New Yorkers born everywhere. I'm one. But now it's 2020. And guess which country seems to embody, imperfectly like all countries, a kind of civility and humanity that could not be more of a contrast with today's United States? I am fascinated by Canada and the way it actualizes such a different version of citizenship and community. And its hard-won summers are so sweet. My mother, my sister, and lots of family live in Toronto, as well as irreplaceable childhood friends. As soon as the plague lifts, I'll be back." So I really recommend this novel to you with its commingling of grief and lust. It's a very sensual book, and of family and of yearning. Okay, and next is, one sec. Next is Consent by the Canadian author Annabelle Lyon, which was on many best of lists here in Canada, best of last year. I very much enjoyed this book, although it's pretty quirky. And I didn't realize that I had chosen to read two novels about sisters and death, one right after the other. So this book, Consent, is about two sets of sisters. Twins Saskia, the steady one, and Jenny, the wild one. And Sarah and Mattie. Sarah, who both loves and resents her intellectually disabled sister, Mattie, but tries her very best to take care of her. It's not an easy novel to read. It's quite sad, but it's also stimulating and quite provocative. It is a novel about consent, but in more ways than I want to tell you about right now, because I'd rather you read the book yourself and discover them. It is certainly about sexual consent, although not in all of the expected ways. The sisters, all very different from each other, but all very close to each other. Their individual and their joint stories are extremely powerful. And I do recommend this book. It's very compact and extremely well written. You'll want to pay attention to all of the words and phrases. There's a very interesting thing that she does. Repetition phrases. So, and yes, it's a very interestingly sensual book as well, about morality, family loyalty, and human quirks. The review in Quill and Quire says, the subtlety with which Lyon handles all this is remarkable, especially considering the novel's brevity. She constructs a narrative that closes on the reader like a mousetrap. And the book does have a surprising but completely believable ending. Okay, now we get to my final book, which is one probably some of you have already read because it's been on the bestseller list for so long, Anxious People by Frederick Backman. And if you haven't read this one, you probably read A Man Called Ove or watched the movie. My friend Sue suggested this book to me, and I am very, very glad that I read it. So the setup is intriguing. Police are called to a hostage taking in an empty apartment. The hostages are all there as they are considering purchasing. It's called an apartment in the book. I guess that's what they call them in Sweden, but it's obviously a condo. The hostage taker is a failed bank robber. Now, each character in this novel, the realtor, the competitive bidders, the father and son cop team, as well as the very desperate bank robber, all have an extremely human and interesting backstory, which is revealed partially to each of the other characters, partially to the cops during the interviews, and mostly to us, the enchanted readers. And all sorts of interconnections are revealed. And in that way, it kind of reminded me of the wonderful novels of Kate Atkinson. Secrets are developed and maintained, friendships are forged, compassion and forgiveness evolve. So I'm going to do something very unusual now. I am going to read to you from the final page of Anxious People. Now, you do not need to cover your ears because it doesn't give anything away. And because if you read the book, as I hope you will forget that you ever heard this. And it was written before the pandemic, but it seems so right for the times and so right as we turn ourselves towards the next year. So here we go. The truth is that this was a story about many different things, but most of all about idiots. Because we're doing the best we can. We really are. We're trying to be grown up and love each other and understand how the hell you're supposed to insert USB leads. We're looking for something to cling onto, something to fight for, something to look forward to. We're doing all we can to teach our children how to swim. We have all of this in common, yet most of us remain strangers. We never know what we do to each other, how your life is affected by mine. Perhaps we hurried past each other in a crowd, and neither of us noticed. And the fibers of your coat brushed against mine for a single moment, and then we were gone. I don't know who you are. But when you get home this evening, when this day is over and the night takes us, allow yourselves a deep breath, because we made it through this day as well. There will be another one along tomorrow. Okay, those are all my books. And now, all 83 of you, I open this up, and I will, as always, go from screen to screen, and then I'll just say who wants to offer a book, and I hope some of you will do so. Okay, Judy, unmute yourself and tell us your book.
I seem to be reading a lot of nonfiction these days. I hope everybody can see this. It's on, oh no, you won't be able to with the virtual background. Hang on just one sec. Let me get rid of the virtual background. Okay, so maybe you can see this on the iPad. It is called The Spy Who Couldn't Spell, and the author's name is complicated, so I will just put it in the chat. It is about a guy who was bullied when he was growing up because he was dyslexic. His teachers thought he was stupid. He became an analyst for the National Security Agency, and then was seconded to an organization that I had never heard about, which did satellite imaging and observing and spying. And the headquarters of it are within 5 kilometers of where my nephew lives, near Washington Dulles Airport. He became angry when he was forcibly retired after 20 years and felt that he was owed something. And so he stole secrets and tried to sell them to Libya. And his communication with the Libyan government got into the hands of the FBI in New York, who sent it to the FBI in Washington. And so all of these government agencies started tracking the potential leaker and ultimately found this guy. I'm about halfway through. It reads, you know, it's just one of these crazy stories, again, that if it were fiction, you would think, no, this is just too far-fetched. But it's really, really fascinating. And it's a quick read. It's one of those things where I kind of have to force myself to read slowly so that I can savor all of it. And I will put the title and the author in the chat.
There we go. Okay, thank you, Judy. Who else? Mimi, you have something. Mimi?
Yes, this isn't a new book, but every time I think of something that sort of, it's quirky, but it makes you feel good. And it's called The Storied Life of A.J. Fikri by Gabriel Zeven.
Yes.
Cynthia, you're not good. It's a wonderful, wonderful book for people who love to read, because first of all, it's a portrait of a human being, of a group of human beings, and of many things, but mostly it's a story about books and their relationships to people and people's relationships to them. So this is the storied life. And, you know, I would, you know, when I think about the books, the one that I mentioned a while ago was the one by Alan Bennett about the Queen.
Yes.
And that, you know, because of the connection to books and what they do for people.
Thank you. You're right. This is a terrific book. I see others nodding about it too. And we all enjoyed it. So if you haven't caught up with it yet, yes, you don't have to bring new books into this meeting. I don't always. I bring older books too. So it's just what we love and what we're reading. We can share together. Okay, I'm going on to the next screen. Anybody here have a suggestion? I see the Rudermans. Marlene, unmute yourself.
Okay, I just read a very interesting book called The Secrets We Kept by Lara Prescott. And it has to do with Nabokov and the writing and the everything around the writing of Dr. Zhivago. And it really is a terrific read. I loved it. I really enjoyed reading it a lot.
Thank you.
I loved it also. It was very, very, couldn't put it down.
Yeah.
Who's the author?
Lara Prescott.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
And her parents named her Lara after the
Yeah.
woman in the book. And
That's
she said
wonderful.
somewhere that I read, she thanked her parents very much for that.
Thank you. Okay, anybody else? I will go to the next screen in a second. All right, anybody else? There are a lot of people without their videos, so I can't tell if you want to add something. So if you do, this is the moment to just unmute yourself and speak up. Anyone? Okay. Then we basically made it in the half hour. I hope that we would, because my promise always to you is that this is a fairly contained and short meeting. Thank you. Okay, so the last book mentioned by Marlene was The Secrets We Keep by Lara Prescott. And I'll try to remember to add that to my list of books as well. Okay, everybody, wonderful to see you all. Thank you. I think we just hit a new record at 80 people. Bye, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you in 2 weeks.
Robert?
Bottom right says leave.
No, come here.
Thank you, Cynthia.
Thank you.
Oh. Click on
Thank you.
Chrome.
Bye. Bye, Myra.
Down here, quick. Leave meeting.
Okay, I can do that.
Click
Thank
over
you.
to leave.
I will do that. I will do that. I just don't want to do it yet. It's fine.
And I'll leave meeting again.
Myra, if you want to stay for a second.